Night Live. Brother Curtis, I've never heard a better scripture reading. Give me a hug. It was so good. You did a good job. I'm proud of all the coaches. You did good. Sunday Night Live. Aren't you glad you don't miss it? Tonight we are on the last of the Ten Commandments. So if you'll turn there to Exodus chapter 20, we'll read verse 17. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, or covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Well, all of the last 5 of the Ten Commandments are about violence against other people. And there are different types of violence. One, of course, is murder. That's pretty obvious. But then when we talk about this idea of covetousness, and we talked about lying, and we talked about bearing false witness, we talked about what it means to mistreat others. Every one of them is a way in which we take away the personhood of another. We talked about stealing and how that, whether we like it or not, it's not about being materialistic. This one's about being materialistic. But the stealing is not because things matter. It's because whether we like it or not, we invest ourselves in things. And that's why it's so beautiful when we give something to someone else. Especially something that's precious to us. When we give that, it's giving a part of who we are. And when you take it from somebody, it's taking a part of who they are. And tonight we come to thou shalt not covet. To covet means simply to envy, to yearn for, to desire, to obsess over that which is rightfully someone else's. Now I'll tell you, there'll be very, very few times when I'll be able to stand here, or really anybody's able to stand up and say, I'm preaching on a subject that I don't personally struggle with. Follow me as I follow Christ. But if there's one of these that I feel, well, murder, obviously. But you understand, this one is one that my family, we have ongoing jokes in our family because I don't know, it's not been one of those things that's really burdened me in as far as temptation. I do understand it because I've seen it. And I've counseled people through it. And I think I even understand why it's so tempting to other people. But for me, the kids will tease me. We'll be out and Lenora will want to look at homes and things. And I'll be like, why? We got the greatest house in the world. And I really think that, right? I think I've got the prettiest wife in the world. I do. And you better not say amen to that. I think I got the smartest kids in the world. I think I've got the fastest car in the world. And we won't take it out and find out, at the racetrack. I just don't, that's not necessarily been something I've struggled with, but I see it around me every day. That's why I got to think about what Don and I argued about a little bit last week, whether or not I lied about the Volkswagen Beetle. Maybe I just thought my car was so awesome, I thought it must be a turbo. That's got to be what it was. But really, what is covetousness? It's not about the stuff, folks. It's not. You know what it's about? Self-esteem. It's about what you think of yourself. Because when you boil it down, stuff is just stuff, isn't it? It doesn't really make any difference 100 years from today if you live in a mansion or if you live in a one-bedroom shack. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make you more likable. It doesn't make you more attractive. It doesn't make you more pleasant to be around. It doesn't do anything based upon what you live in. It doesn't change who you are at all. And the car you drive doesn't change who you are. And the clothes you wear don't change who you are. Some of them are much more comfortable than others, yes. But besides that, it really is not much of a difference. Stuff is just stuff. Now, don't misunderstand. It's okay to enjoy stuff. In fact, I think the opposite of covetousness is truly enjoying stuff. Your stuff. You understand? The opposite of covetousness is puts a very high premium on stuff. It just means that you really cherish the stuff that isn't someone else's. Because it's yours. You see? But it also means that you're satisfied. It means you're content. And one of the true dangers of a capitalistic society is that much of the time it's driven by a lack of contentment. And that really is a problem. Now, I'm a capitalist and I believe in it. And I think it gives opportunities for people. We've been the most generous society in the history of the world. As I mentioned last week, I'm always amazed when I go to Guatemala that airplane after airplane after airplane after airplane lands. American, United, Delta from the United States, and off of it march people of every walk of life. Missionary Baptist mission team, Church of Christ mission team, and then you get Helping Hands, and then you might even get liberal Hollywood actors for the third world. I mean, it doesn't matter. Every spectrum of political persuasion. That's America. We've been very generous. I think that's partially because of our capitalistic design. But the downside, the danger, is that sometimes it's driven by a lack of contentment. That if I accumulate more, if I have more, then I'll be happy. No, you won't. You know what the key to being happy when you get more is? To be happy with what you have now. You know what the key to being able to enjoy it? Some of you think someday I'm going to work hard enough, I'm going to get a Porsche, or I'm going to get a Vet. I hope you get a Porsche and a Vet and loan it to the preacher sometime. That'd be great. You know, I hope you get that someday. But you know what? If you're not satisfied with your Ford Pinto, you won't be satisfied with your Porsche. Because somebody else is going to have a better one. Somebody else is going to have a newer one. And you're going to have to start working hard again to be happy. Understand? This idea of covetousness is really about being happy in ourselves and not founding our self-esteem in things. I've known people in the church, good friends, that struggled with this. I remember some friends years ago who you walk in their house and they always had a picture on their refrigerator out of a magazine of the newest car they wanted, Ford Explorer. Oh, and we get that Ford Explorer. And then when they got an Explorer, they had an Expedition. They were Ford people. You can figure that out real fast. Expedition. Tore out a picture of a Chevy Suburban and replaced it. Didn't make them happy. You know, wasn't what they wanted. But they always thought, well, but it was so strange when they finally got that car, then they had a new one they had to shoot for. And guess what? The new one wasn't going to make them happy either. Contentment. Contentment is such a lost virtue in our society. And the 10th commandment is all about being satisfied, being content with what you have. It's really all about being happy. And realizing that happiness is not found in the accumulation of what man can gather to himself. So we learn a couple of things. First of all, the Bible's clear that covetousness begins with a misconception. A tremendous falsehood. And that is Satan and the world try to convince us that things can satisfy us. There is nothing in the world in regard to money or possessions that can satisfy. Let's be very clear about that. Now, I've heard it said before, well, I've learned to be rich and I've learned to be poor and I can be content either way, but if I have my preference, I'll take rich. You know, you've heard that before. And we understand. We're not living in a dream world with our heads in the sand. I mean, we understand that things and money makes life somewhat easier. That's not what we're talking about. It's all right to enjoy those things. What we're talking about is having to have them and they being the objective to which our joy and our peace and our personal meaning is tied. And folks, that's what we see every day, don't we? In fact, I'm not sure there would be an advertising industry if it wasn't for covetousness. Because now some advertising is not rooted in covetousness. Some talk about the practicality of certain products. Some talk about the usefulness of certain products. But whenever anything is about how you look to other people, what image you put forth to other people, or what people will think of you because of what you have or what you wear or what you drive or what you live in, that is rooted in the world's problem of self-esteem, which is covetousness. And it is a lie. All you have to do is ask the countless rich people before who thought that having more would make them happy. And it didn't. All you have to do is ask the Rockefellers or the Vanderbilts and those who've had everything the world had to offer and threw themselves out of windows, if wealth will make you happy. One of those great tycoons was asked, is there anything, there's nothing in the world you don't have. What could you possibly want? And he says, I live for one thing, one more dollar. Then you're not living, buddy. Because you don't enjoy the billions you already have. You see, the world has perpetuated a lie. And the Bible has made it clear. Luke chapter 12, verse 15. Luke 12, 15. Jesus is speaking and says, and he said to them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things that he possesses. One's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. But yet the world wants us to believe that that's the case, don't they? Doesn't Satan want you to think that you are what you have? That you are? It's so funny because we talk about, you never seen a hearse towing a U-Haul. You've heard that expression. And we say you can't take it with you when you go. Now I think we need to clarify that in the church, because there is something you can take with you when you go. You do realize that. There's one investment you can make. You can invest in people. Because the only thing that will leave this world with you, that can leave this world with you, are spiritual things, not material things. And the only spiritual things are people. So don't ever say you can't take anything with you when you go. You can. But you can't take material possessions. They're temporal. A man's life, Jesus says plainly, do not consist of the abundance of what he has. That is not who you are. You know, those who've had the most sometimes understand this the best. I know an elder in the church who's made and lost 4 fortunes. And it doesn't affect him at all. He says, oh, I made it, then I lost it, then I made it, then I lost it. And I talked to him one time when he was on the low end of the spectrum. He said, well, I guess I'll just have to make it again. Oh, well. Because it's just stuff. It's just stuff. And that brings us to the second observation that is so important, and that is God has a better life in store for us than the world has to offer. And it's found through contentment, not through covetousness. You see, the sinful hearts of men are the root of their unhappiness. We can look over in places like Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7, and we examine verses 21 through 23. For from within, out of the heart of men proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornication, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, and evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All of these evil things come from within and defile a man. And you know, when you think about it, why would he say covetousness and envy? Why would he include those with such things as blasphemy, murder, fornication? Because if you think about it, in some ways it may even be worse. You know, covetousness and envy, not being satisfied with what we have, speaks volumes. It speaks to the inadequacy of what we have, the inadequacy of who we are, and the dissatisfaction with whoever provided what we have. So what does that say? If I, as a child of God, say, my car's not nice enough, and my house isn't big enough, and my wife's not pretty enough, and all of the things that people covet, then I say, Lord, you haven't provided enough for me. Lord, I'm not grateful for what I have, because you've shortchanged me. And in addition to that, not only is it the height of ungratitude, it is the height of arrogance that says, I deserve better than what I have. And when you look and you see some of the people that were blessed the most, the great characters of the Bible, I've often tried to determine the exact formula of how that all took place. Because, it's so strange, because we don't follow a health and wealth doctrine. The stuff we hear from Osteen and from some of the others on the radio and on television, we know that's not an exact prescription. The prayer of Jabez, name it and claim it, and it will be yours. That is not biblical in any way. But there is the reality that almost every child of God and faithful servant in the Old Testament period was immeasurably blessed spiritually, but even physically, even materially. Look at Abraham. He's got so much he can't spend it. And even goes in that circumstance with Abimelech, and he does the lying about Sarah. He's the one in the wrong. He's the sinner, and Abimelech pays him. And he leaves twice as rich as he came. That doesn't seem right and fair. And you look at men like David, and you look at men like Daniel, and you look at, character after Old Testament character. We're told not to covet, not to be about material things, that our lives are not consisting of the abundance of what we possess. Yet, many, many, many of God's servants had a whole lot of stuff. I think it's because of this. Those same servants had a character trait that isn't visible on the surface until you dive in and explore who they really were. Abraham didn't really care all that much if he had 3 sheep or 30,000 sheep. It was secondary to him. David was the rich king of all Israel, but he was happy being a shepherd in a field. Daniel becomes the second most powerful man in the entire world, but he was satisfied just being a servant of the king. And you look at Joseph, who becomes the deliverer of not only his family, but really the entire Middle East. And he becomes the second only to Pharaoh himself. But Daniel was more than satisfied to be Potiphar's slave and be the best one he could possibly be. What's the point? Those men all knew that regardless of how much they had, that their life did not consist of the abundance of what they possessed. And so they were willing, if it meant God asked them to give it up, would Abraham have given up his flocks and herds for God? Is there any question? Abraham would give up his son for God. He'd moved beyond the trivial as far as the stuff. And I think maybe the real reality of it is God was willing to bless those great men and women of faith because he knew they could handle those blessings. Sometimes I wonder if believers now would be more blessed with material things Just like the men who were given the different talents, 1 and 3 and 5 talents. And each were given according to what they could manage and they could handle. And he says in that very parable, to he who has proven himself or who has managed well, to him is faithful in a few things, to him will be given much. You see, God doesn't mind us to have. In fact, all throughout the Old Testament, he gave and he gave and he gave. But it is absolutely essential that we know who we are. You are you, regardless of what you live in, regardless of what you drive, regardless of what you wear. You are you. And those things have no bearing on whether you are of quality and whether you are valuable and whether you are pleasing to God. No bearing. And when you realize that, I mean really realize it, not give it just lip service, but when you believe it in your heart, then you have found a personal self-esteem that is rooted in something beyond the things of this world. That is rooted in not just who you are, most certainly not what you have, but is rooted in whose you are. You see, you can take a prince, and just like the story of the prince and the pauper, when he went down in the slums and the ghettos and wore, lice and bug-infested clothing and hobnobbed with the commoners, observation would tell you he still wasn't a commoner. Because he knew, regardless of what he wore, regardless of temporarily where he lived, a prince knows whose son he is. And knows that none of those trappings change his identity. Tonight, as we close out the 10 Commandments, I hope you've been blessed by this study. I've been blessed by restudying these again myself. And specifically tonight, the covetousness, this is around us everywhere, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't want things. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't enjoy things. I think you should. I think you should enjoy the things God has given you and thank Him for those things all the time. And if you do have that Porsche, drive it and say, Lord, what a car. Thank you. If you have a nice home, enjoy it. Have the preacher over for dinner. That'd be a great way to enjoy it. Enjoy it. But you see, make sure that those things are not in any way connected to who you believe you are. Make sure that's all about your relationship with Him. If you need to improve that relationship with Him, if you need to make any change whatsoever, we're here. This is a place where we don't judge, but where we support and we lift up and we help one another. We pray for each other. We're all in this boat together. If you feel sick in your soul, then you've come to a hospital tonight. A hospital for souls. Come right now as we stand and as we sing.